This time on Engine Masters, it is the 1,000 horsepower muffler showdown! You gotta do that when you get a new muffler, it's kind of a rule. Welcome to the episode I like to call Another Excuse to Run My Big Block Chevy. I love this thing. It's 555 cubic inches. It's got an airflow research cylinder head, a nasty comp solid roller cam, an 871 supercharger from the blower shop, and we're running it on E85 with QFT carburetors. Now, on a prior episode, you saw us making up to 1,500 horsepower on nitrous with this thing. Right now, we have got it detuned to make about 1,050 horsepower. Why? Because I think there's a lot of you out there these days that have got 1,000 horsepower on your ProCharger motor or your Roots blown deal or your nitrous and blown deal or even your turbo, and you want to know what kind of exhaust system can you put on your engine and not give up a whole lot of Wheaties. And that's what we're here to find out. These are the mufflers I chose to test, and let me tell you why. I went to summitracing.com and I was looking for the muffler that would actually attenuate sound. There's a lot of race bullets that you can buy, little tiny mufflers that are really only just for decoration for racing where they say you have to have a muffler. No, I wanted something that would actually be quiet enough that maybe you could putt it around on the street or live with it on an event like Hot Rod Drag Week. That's why all of these mufflers are the larger oval style rather than little race bullets. Now, when I went shopping for a muffler that had a 4-inch in and a 4-inch out, I found out that really your options are limited as far as the muffler configuration. You can only get center in and center out on almost everything except for the Flowmaster, which you'll see I got side in and center out. There's a bunch of 4-inch mufflers that are bigger, like turbo mufflers for big diesel trucks, but those are gonna slaughter power. So these are the ones that I chose. In addition to all being oval, there's 3 of them that have a straight-through perforated design and 1 of them that's chambered. What you're gonna see here is the stuff I chose that I felt was most appropriate to actually fit in a muscle car with 1,000 horsepower, but there's other options out there, and of course a bunch of other brands. But these are gonna be representative, including the Hooker Maximum Flow. This is the cheapest muffler that we've got here. Current pricing at Summit Racing at the time that we shot this video for this deal is $89.75. It's the only unit here that's made in China. The rest of them are made in USA. It is aluminized steel construction, and it does have the straight-through perforated core. And I always say that the muffler that makes the most power is the one that you can see through. So that is a see-through Hooker Maximum Flow. Next up, we've got the MagnaFlow muffler. Now this one is $166.51, but it is made in America. It does have stainless steel construction, and once again, it is that see-through core, no surprises there. Next, we're moving on to the Flowmaster. Now this is different than all the other mufflers here because it is a fully aluminized steel welded muffler that is not straight through. It has got some welded in metal baffles in here, one straight across here that has a hole in it. It's got sort of a V-shaped one. This is the classic race muffler that started it all in the very earliest days of fastest street car racing. This one happens to be a Series 30. It also happens to be the largest of the mufflers that we're testing here. At Summit, this Flowmaster is $194.95. Now here's a very serious thing. This muffler, the Flowmaster, can be used as a skid plate. The reason I say this is a real thing is that if your car is really low, all pro-streeted out, and you're gonna be dragging it over driveways and speed bumps, legitimately, the construction of the Flowmaster is going to survive longer than any of the rest of these, so that is a consideration. Lastly, our most expensive muffler in the lineup, the Borla, at $218.99. It is all stainless steel construction, once again, straight through perforated design. Now let's talk about size. It's gonna be tough to fit these underneath the car, so this is a consideration. The lowest one, the most squatty this way, is definitely the Borla. Both the Borla and the MagnaFlow are about the same width. The super tanker here is clearly the Flowmaster, and the mid-range one is going to be the Hooker. Now, if you're building a race car, I figure weight is really important to you, and exhaust systems are heavy, so let's go over the weight of each one of these. The lightest muffler is the Borla at 9.08 pounds. Next up, the MagnaFlow is 10.42 pounds. The Hooker maximum flow, 11.84 pounds. And the super tanker of a big old Flowmaster muffler is actually 17.34 pounds. So we're gonna put the big block in there. We're gonna run it with open headers. Then we're gonna run it with 9 feet of exhaust piping and no mufflers at all, so we can see what that does. Then we're gonna start running through the mufflers from the shortest to the longest. And at the end, I'm also gonna look at running 4 mufflers at the same time on the engine, because we're also looking for quiet. And at every stage, we'll be checking these things with a decibel meter. So you're gonna get a lot of meat in this episode, including the 1,000 horsepower big block. All right, let's go. Here's the first opinion I want from you guys, which is this harder on mufflers because it's a blown engine or easier because it's a blown engine? In other words, is the forced evacuation make it easier, or does the extra volume make it harder?
I'll take the first crack at that.
Okay.
I don't think it makes any difference whatsoever.
1,000 horse is 1,000 horse, doesn't matter.
Right.
Even though the engine's actually making more than 1,000 horsepower.
Ooh, good point, Freiberger. Oh, you were holding that up your sleeve.
Right?
Yeah, you got me.
Yep. How about you?
I don't know, on that train of thought, I suppose it could be 1,200 and 1,200. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
I think your question was, does it matter because we're supposedly forcing the air out the exhaust instead of using it to help scavenge?
Right.
And, you know, look, I gotta say, mufflers are not my deal. I got nothing.
Don't know. Well, my comment on it's making more than 1,000 horsepower is obviously to turn the blower is gonna take 150 on this thing, maybe more, 200. And so essentially we're testing 1,200 horsepower mufflers.
Exactly.
And actually, we don't know what the tune-up is right now. This thing actually might make 1,030 or 40.
Yeah.
So we're gonna run the thing on baseline open header. But here's kind of my thought process. The first thing I want to do is run a big length of tubing with no muffler on it whatsoever, so that we can just know what that variable is. And then let's just blast through the mufflers and then look at all of the data at the same time, see what we get. Oh, I'm also going to do the dB meter so we can see what the peak is at wide open.
Okay.
Okay, let's go. Okay, here's our baseline with open headers. It made 1,063.2 horsepower. That makes me happy. Also 868.7 pound-feet of torque. The best thing about this is that we nailed a power number that I think will let us also make 1,000 horsepower once we start killing power with mufflers.
It was pretty easy, really. I mean, we just took a stab at a couple pulleys, changed them, and just changed it from 1,300 or whatever it used to make in some configuration to boom, here's 1,050 or 60.
Yeah, we wanted to kill a few hundred horsepower out of it so that it would actually survive this test. What is the actual drive ratio on it right now?
It's actually 2% over. It's 51 on the bottom, 50 on the top, so it's not much overdrive. That's a good blower.
2%.
Yeah.
Wow, that's actually really good.
Yeah.
What kind of boost is it making? I think people would want to know.
It's not much. I've run this thing before when it was only making a couple.
Oh, yeah. This is dinky boost. I mean, at peak power, it's making 5.8 pounds of boost.
Wow, that's nothing.
That's nothing. You know what? That's a pump gas motor. We're running it on an E85, but that would run on 91.
You know, I think it might, except for no intercooler.
Yeah, it would definitely
with an intercooler would, but
be more of a risk.
with E85 in it, it's got a built-in intercooler.
It's a total breeze. Okay, we can move on immediately. I just want to put straight pipe with no muffler whatsoever and keep that length of pipe throughout the entire test so that we're not testing like exhaust system length, but just the muffler itself.
How long?
I've got 4-foot stick, so I guess it's gonna end up like 8.
4 or 8 or what?
Yeah, whatever the adapters are and everything. Okay, so let's go to straight pipe.
Do it.
This next run is gonna be with 8 feet of straight pipe. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
is also 113 decibels.
What was it before?
113.
Yeah.
I mean, it's open exhaust.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's not quieter for moving it all the way to the back of the room, but obviously not. Now we're into something I don't think I've ever done before, which is a complete length exhaust system with no mufflers, and it made 1,067.1 horsepower, 868 pound-feet, but the real question is, how does it compare to open header? Basically, it made exactly the same power, no difference at all between regular open header with an 18-inch collector extension or a 9-foot collector extension.
It surprises me, it really does.
We might see something different here if it had like an over the axle and a turnout and some bends in it, but for perfectly straight pipe, it doesn't seem to care.
No, it doesn't.
All right, so the next thing I think we should do is throw the mufflers in the system and just rip through them.
Okay.
We're gonna go and test them as fast as we can right in a row, because I think they're all gonna be real similar and we don't want the weather to change and,
I think it's
add
good
any
to test back
variables.
to back.
I also think that we need to stick with keeping that overall length of the exhaust the same. I mean, it didn't seem to matter, but I'd like to eliminate every variable.
Yeah, it's a good point. You just don't want to add another variable that you have to question after the fact.
Yeah, so I guess we
good stuff.
start with the shortest muffler and move to the longest so that we can
Keep cutting?
so I don't want to cut the most and then have to add. Yeah, we'll just keep on cutting. Okay, cool. I think first up muffler is gonna be the shortest one, which is the Hooker maximum flow.
Okay.
Yeah, all right, here we go.
Tape measure.
Now we're ready to go with mufflers. The very first one is going to be the Hooker maximum flow. (107). Our first muffler was the Hooker. Now we're going into the MagnaFlow. So the dB on that one was 108 at wide open versus 107. It's 1 decibel. Now the very last of our straight-through mufflers, the Borla. The last set of mufflers we're gonna test here are the Flowmasters, the only ones that you can't see through and the only ones with offset in and out. (103), they're quieter. Results with the Hooker mufflers, 874.6 pound-feet of torque and 1,070.2 horsepower. Survey says MagnaFlow mufflers make 875.4 pound-feet of torque and 1,063.6 horsepower, still at 7,000 RPM. Final results with the Borla muffler, 868.7 pound-feet of torque, 1,064.5 horsepower. Our final player is the Flowmaster, which just made 868.6 pound-feet of torque and 1,056.7 horsepower. And now it's gonna get good because we're gonna compare the graphs of all these different mufflers. First, let's call up the graph for straight pipe. So on this deal, we're looking at 868 pound-feet of torque and 1,067.1 horsepower, just with 9 feet of straight pipe on it. So you want to compare the mufflers in the order that we tested them?
Sure.
Okay, so first up is going to be the Hooker. Interesting. So the Hooker is in red and the straight pipe is in black. The Hooker actually made more power.
A little bit, but
Surprise.
it's
How's that
there.
possible?
I don't know, but it is, so it's just better.
What if the case is big enough that the engine saw that as the end of the length of the pipe for the pressure wave, and it actually shortened up the whole exhaust system? That might be why it did that.
Or maybe it's acting like an accumulator.
Maybe we have no idea what we're talking about. For whatever reason, the Hooker muffler actually made more power than straight pipe. That is interesting. And not just at peak, we're talking everywhere above 5,100 RPM.
Kind of through the middle.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
By how much though? What's the difference right here at say 6,000?
10.
Pretty much
9.
9. Yeah, surprising. So let's now look at the Hooker as our standard and compare that with the next one, which is the MagnaFlow. Ooh, even more interesting. Hooker in black, MagnaFlow in red. Once again, the hooker just comes out on top.
Yeah.
How?
I attribute it to the case volume.
Maybe it is the case volume.
It's got a little more case volume than the MagnaFlow.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what my theory was, which was that it's so big that it's diffusing the pressure wave or reducing the pressure or reducing the speed of the flow and somehow creating the pressure wave that the engine likes.
We're dealing with apples and oranges because the case volume is an actual indisputable characteristic of that muffler.
Right.
Whereas pressure wave reverberation and those kinds of factors, that's more getting into the theoretical aspects. So.
Well, it's a feature versus a benefit. The feature is that the case volume is bigger. The benefit, we don't know.
Why?
Except for that it makes more power. So the bottom line here is we don't have a crystal clear answer, but once again, the hooker muffler comes on top as compared with the MagnaFlow. Just a little bit, but it wins. So now let's compare the hooker to the Borla. The Borla being the smallest case volume of anything that we've tested. It's the smallest muffler.
Well, we'll see if the trend continues here.
Black line there is the hooker. Here comes the Borla in red, and again, the hooker comes out on top. I'm surprised. I thought they would all be identical because they're all just so straight through, but it has to have something to do with that case volume.
Yeah, they're actually pretty close in all fairness. But
well, they are very, very close, but the hooker's better, and in this case, at every single point in the curve. And by the way, we tested these back to back to back. It's not like there's a weather change or a difference in the coolant temperature or the temperature in the room, nothing.
And we also compensated for the slight difference in case length by adjusting the pipe length so that the system length is exactly the same each time.
This is as fair as we can possibly be, and the hooker's still on top. So now we have to look at the hooker versus the Flowmaster, with the largest case volume, I might add.
The straight-through muffler you would think would have an advantage over a chambered muffler.
Here comes the Flowmaster. Oh! Flowmaster in red, hooker muffler in black. That is amazing. So the bottom line conclusion is the cheapest muffler in the test was the one that made the most power.
It's not stainless steel.
Right?
Maybe that's part of the cost.
It's made in China.
Okay.
All the others are made in America.
Okay. But it still won.
But it still made the most power. That's crazy. So here's, I guess, the question is, do you guys feel that this result would be similar on a naturally aspirated engine or a different combination? Or do you feel that we're just seeing an anomaly based on this particular engine?
I think at this, my opinion is this power level, when you've got a 4-inch muffler and that sort of size case, I think it does the same thing on an NA engine. I don't think it affects it much.
Yeah, it's just, well, do you agree that this is making more airflow than an NA engine would at the same power level because it is driving the supercharger?
Because it's really making 1,250 horsepower.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So moving air is moving air. This is moving a lot of air. So it arguably on an NA, like, you know, my NA big block that makes 1,000, you're gonna see the same results or maybe less of a difference between the two because there's less flow demand.
Yeah, but I agree with you, Steve. I think it's just the results are the results. It's not some kind of anomaly or testing variation. That's what happened. That's what they did.
I think it's just the case size and that diameter hole. It just accommodates 1,000 horsepower really well or 1,200 horsepower really well. I have never tested mufflers this big on this kind of power level, so it's a real eye-opener for me how good they can be.
It's really not that bad. It really isn't. So let's look at our, I was gonna say best to worst, but that's what's on the screen right here. The Flowmaster came out on the bottom and the hooker maximum flow muffler came out on top.
Well, you basically look at these numbers compared to the open header.
It's better.
Better, yeah. I mean, so it actually takes that shriek off the thing. It's not quite as loud, and it makes a little bit more power.
So let's talk about that. The decibel rating for all of these mufflers. At idle, basically, when it was open, whether it had the 9 feet of pipe on it or not, it was 79 or 80 decibels. All of the straight-through mufflers, the hooker, the MagnaFlow, the Borla, they cut it down to 73 or 74. The Flowmaster, also 74. Now, I'm curious about that data because to me, it sounded in the room like the Flowmaster was quieter.
It sounded quieter to me as well.
Yeah, so at idle, maybe the dB meter was not as sensitive to the ambient in the room and everything, but at wide open throttle, I think this is legit. With no mufflers at all, 113 decibels. The Hooker, the MagnaFlow, the Borla, all between 107 and 109.
Okay.
All of a sudden, the Flowmaster goes to 103.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the Flowmaster wins at actual sound attenuation. And a lot of people, of course, think that the Flowmaster's got that cool Flowmaster sound, so there's that.
Well, and you know, when you're making 1,070 horsepower, if it makes 1,060 and is quiet and you can drive it.
Yeah, yeah, what difference does it make? So that's the data on decibels.
Yeah, good stuff.
Can we just look at all of them together on the screen? Basically, I want to look at all the mufflers together at the same time on the graph to show you that really they're all pretty close. I don't think you can make a mistake with any of these, although it's hard to argue that the cheapest muffler made the most power. It's kind of awesome. Okay, so this is just 6,000 to 7,000 RPM. Green is the Hooker, clearly on top. Red is the Flowmaster, so it was the worst. Everything else falls right in between the two. What's the range that we're looking at there from best to worst? From 1,056 to 1,070 horsepower. So again, as a percentage of total power in the engine, it's not that significant.
1%?
Yeah, 1%.
Yeah.
But for bragging rights,
yeah,
the Hooker wins. Okay, you know what I want to do next, because this is something I've seen on a lot of the fastest streetcar stuff from Drag Week and everything, is 4 mufflers in the same system. A lot of guys do that to cut the sound down. So I want to take our 2 best mufflers, so the Hookers and the MagnaFlows together in the same exhaust system and see what happens. Now we're ready to go with the quad mufflers. We got the MagnaFlow right on the header and the Hookers out back.
At wide open, it seemed kind of loud to me.
103, basically the same as the Flowmaster.
Okay.
Yeah, but quieter than just a single set of mufflers.
Well, it'd be interesting if the Flowmasters made the same power or less than 2 of the straight-through mufflers with the same sound quality.
That will be really good.
Yeah.
I want to see that. That was really cool.
really quiet.
And at the high end on the dB, it did the same as the Flowmaster, 103.
Okay.
But the tone is mellower somehow.
Really soft.
It's not shredding, so it might be the same, you know, sound pressure. But didn't you think it sounded cooler?
Yeah, I thought so too. I could hear more of the blower as it was pulling and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how about the power? So interesting, our quad muffler setup made 1,066.3 horsepower and 860.7 pound-feet of torque. So pretty good. I guess the big question I've got is, let's compare it to the Flowmaster, because it's the same sound pressure as the Flowmaster. So do you make more power with 2 straight-throughs at the same sound level, or do you make more power with the Flowmaster?
I would give the dual muffler the advantage here.
I think probably. Oh, interesting. So the black line here is our quad muffler setup, and the red line is the Flowmaster.
It's interesting what it did to the curve.
Yeah, actually the Flowmaster is way better below 6,000 RPM, and then the quad muffler picks up on top a little bit. I think when the flow demand gets higher, the blockages in the Flowmaster become more of a problem.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the quad muffler versus our best dual straight-through setup.
Hooker, okay. So now we're gonna look at quad muffler versus our best muffler, the Hooker. So Hooker in red, quad muffler in black. Clearly 4 mufflers is a greater restriction and does not make as much power, and obviously is heavier and harder to package.
But quieter.
So, but significantly quieter to my ear. So you really, your decision is, do you want to make more power, or do you want to be a little quieter and carry more weight and have a bigger packaging problem? So I know you guys are probably sick of doing all my exhaust tests. I mean, look back at what we've done. X pipe, H pipe, 2.5 versus, 3-inch, on and on, blower headers, all this stuff. I have more questions than ever. I'm ready to do more. I seriously want to test more exhaust stuff, especially knowing what we know with this stuff. I want to try a bell mouth on the end of an exhaust tip.
Yeah.
Because we know that flow isn't that good with a straight cut.
Ooh.
So what happens if it was bell mouthed?
Maybe we can do a whole exhaust tip extravaganza and see if it does anything.
Exhaust tips, do they make power? That's a good idea, Dulcich. And if we do it, guess what? You will see it on a future episode of
Engine Masters.
The Borla being, and that's the Borla muffler. And that's the Borla muffler. I can't say muffler all of a sudden.
It's a tongue twister.
It's a tongue twister, the Borla muffler. Our final player is the Flow Master, which just made.
Oh man, I can't maintain my composure. Oh. Okay.